Hello everyone, I'm Chandan Kumar from AML Department 3rd year. Today I'll be explaining about my mini project Adaptive Engineering for Generalized Individual Safety. Let's begin. So the main agenda of this project is to solve the small data paradox in medical AI and to improve the safety measures taken by reducing the risks and reinforcement learning, which is the common problem faced in the type 1 diabetes hypoglycemia. And the scope of the project is for enough personalized medicine along with real-time safety assurance, which we call as simplex architecture. We'll be discussing the methodology, output results, test cases, conclusion, and finally the future work. So coming to the introduction part, so what exactly is this project? So we actually proposed a unified five-layer cyber-physical architecture, which is autonomous and can be adaptive and it is designed for the individualized treatment optimization. The core objective is to solve the problem for a particular patient rather than solving it for the average patient. So the technical synthesis involves digital twins and a formal verification block, which we call as simplex architecture. The problem we actually address here is the ergodicity crisis. So ergodicity crisis is nothing but assuming a particular treatment will be valid for particular individual when it is tested on average group. So that's where we call it a small data paradox, where we don't have a lots of millions of data samples to train large deep learning models, or where we are supposed to solve a particular patient problem for a single individual. So our key innovation focuses the treatment optimization from day one, treating the patient as complete stranger. So we actually bridge the gap between the evidence and individual care. So the traditional evidence-based medicine relies on average treatment effects. So as we have discussed earlier, the ergodicity crisis, which are also known as the average treatment effects, which assume that a medicine will work fine for a individual when it is tested on average group. So what if it's different for your case? That's the main problem we are actually addressing in our project. So the population level conclusions, which works for an average, can it work for you? So we'll be solving this small data paradox by a file-led architecture as explained before. And yeah, these are all the main things which our architecture tries to cover, and we actually propose VACA and Phoenix architecture, which suffered from structural instability, sample inefficiency, and other crises. The main project scope is a five-layered cyber-physical architecture, which we actually propose here. And the objective is autonomous, causally valid treatment optimization with formal safety guarantees. So the domain we are trying to solve is type 1 diabetes management, which is for insulin and other activities. And the main target audience are endocrinologists and requiring individualized dosing tools because they are the main people who actually use this system. And yeah, who does research in the causal inference, safe oral, and digital twins field. So the deliverables we propose here is our aegis architecture along with algorithmic novelty and validation tests. So the scope of the project involves implementation of all the five layers stacked along to a single integration layer. And we actually estimated using automatic switching, ACUKF, Gaussian and Rao Blackwellized PF, which is also known as chaotic estimation. And for the safety, we propose STL verification independent of learning components. And finally, the data is multimodal integration. So, which doesn't come in our project scope is optimizing, which is limited to discrete treatment choices, not continuous values. And yeah, these are some pretty other privacy concerns which we actually solve in this project. And then coming to the data sources, the input data is taken from sensors and text, and we actually use simulation data using UVA and Padova type 1 diabetes, which are approved by FDA. And the limitations here are the taken samples are just 500 particles on mobile devices. It doesn't involve the real world clinical trial data, so that's our future work. And then the architectural strategy involves a gray box architecture where we use two of the layers for combination of the predictions. and then which keeps the learning algorithms from layers 1 to 4, and safety supervisor includes a layer 5. So the layer 1 is semantic sensorium, which takes the input data, and then adaptive distant twin, which actually replicates the patient's health condition in a computer state. And then finally, we find the confounders using causal inference engine, and then we take the decision and whether verify it if it's harming the patient or not using the simplex safety architecture. So the validation framework we proposed here is it is in silico stress tests. We actually tested the project using simulation data as discussed before, and it is designed for 30 patient pilot study. So this is the system diagram, architecture diagram of Aegis 3.0, which means that this is third refined version of Aegis. So this is where we get input data, and the text or semantic standardization is done, and we have a gray box physio modeling, and along with effect identification, and the final Asian engine along with simplex architecture. And then these are some UML diagrams which will be required for the final prototype or system we propose. So there's a class diagram use case, and we have sequence diagrams as given, where we have a patient, the first layer, second, and 5 layers along with the actions they perform. So coming to the algorithmic part, we used several algorithms in this architecture. The first thing involves physiological modeling, the digital twin. So as discussed before, we actually propose a gray box architecture which involves two kind of layers. The first one is universal differential equations (UDEs), which combine a physiological laws along with neural networks model to learn patient specific behaviors, along with adaptive constraint UKF, which actually adopts the taken choices based on the patient data and the patient conditions. And then finally coming to the causal inference engine, which actually finds confounders using the patient data and DAX. So this is done using proximal G estimation and harmonic time varying G estimation. And then coming to the final decision engine, it is done using counterfactual Thompson sampling, which is a bandit kind of algorithm, the reinforcement learning based of kind of algorithm, which takes a decision based on the reward, so it's kind of adjusting. And then action-centered contextual bandit. And then finally coming to the signal temporal logic and hierarchical Bayesian priors, which is the final safety supervisor layer, which decides whether to take the decision or not. And then coming to the hardware part, we actually ran this whole project on Kaggle hardware, which includes cloud-based CPU environments and GPU for acceleration. And we actually need LLM for the first layer to take the input text and perform the semantic entropy calculation and all. So we use Llama 3 8 billion parameterized model, which is kind of expensive to run on normal hardware, so it requires cloud GPUs. And then coming to the software selection, we use Python 3.11 above version for its extensive ecosystem, and for validation as discussed above, which is UR Padova simulators approved by FDA. And then coming to the implementation, we have seen this. So first layer is semantic sensorium using the Llama model, and then coming to the second part, it's adaptive digital twin, where we use constructed universal differential equations along with the adaptive layer, and then the causal inference engine, and finally the decision engine, finally the simplex safety supervisor. So these are some important code segment which we'll be looking later in the code part. So this is the first layer implementation. And then this is core update logic layer 4, and then this is the final self-driven constant check, like whether to take the decision or not, whether it might harm the patient badly or no. And then based on our tests, we actually found that our system is 0.0% conservative. So that means that whenever decision has to be taken in a way that it rises the hypoglycemia level, the safety supervisor triggered it and blocked the insulin level. So you can see it here, whenever the insulin level got 68, it's actually a range of severe hypoglycemia. So it actually blocked the decision and went into a conservative mode. So these are the performance metrics of our Aegis whole system, which we ran unit tests for each of the layer, and we can see the results of scores here for the concepts extraction, and for each of the layer, which we'll be discussing in the code part. And then coming to the performance benchmarks, our architecture versus other leading architectures. So we can see here standard Thompson sampling, which we use in the layer 4, is it's not completely safe when it's not used with other unified architecture. So coming to the safe Bayesian optimization, it's usually conservative, but our proposed framework is 0.0% highly conservative. And then coming to the cumulative regret, block down learning, and causal bias predictions, our aegis architecture has passed pretty all the tests with zero safety violations and maintaining high learning efficiency. So these are the test cases we give for the first layer. High ambiguity patient text input, like different kinds of user emotional data and all, and the expected outcome is like it kind of triggers a human in the loop review whenever needed. So it actually triggered more than 85% of the cases, so which is 100% capture rate, and the result was test case was passed. So in the similar way, we have run several test cases for layer 2, which is constraint check whether the the system is trying to calculate the hidden states or not. Coming to the causal thing, which is trying to identify the confounder variables or not, which actually identified, and it has reduced the bias 75.7% of the time. And then coming to the posterior collapse and reflex latency, which has got less than 100 milliseconds of latency. So all the test case results were passed. And then these are some pretty user test cases, which are like emergency response, ambiguous data, and then whether the system is maintaining a conservative state by blocking harmful decisions or not. And yeah, these are some other pretty similar test cases which the system has passed pretty well. And then the same test case here with time in range percent of 74.9% and safety violation is 0%. So and the reflex latency is too good that it's less than 1 millisecond. So finally, we actually present a successful engineered file-layered framework that resolves the small data paradox by combining physiological periods for deep learning. We achieved 0.0% of severe hypoglycemia with sub-millisecond intervention. So which actually none of the major leading AI LLMs or pretty usual systems doesn't actually achieve. So we have demonstrated that we can reduce the causal bias by 75.7%, and we validated on FDA accepted simulators to deliver 74.9% time in range. So our future work involves we are trying to solve this cold start problem using federated learning, and we are trying to adapt this for hypertension, chronic pain, and other health conditions, and we are trying to optimize the LLM deployment in mobile-based devices, and we are trying to go beyond this and equal to 30 clinical test cases. And these are some references used for our project. And moving to the coding part. So this is the layer 1 test results we actually tested the whole system on. So these are the basic sample data we actually created here, and you can see the seeds we generated 10 seeds, and this is concept mapping. So the whole concept is whatever the input given by user, it must be mapped to particular health terms, whether it's I'm feeling bad, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling uh, pretty bad today. It all means that the user is suffering from stress or what. So in that case, we actually maintain a hash map here. So this will be replaced by snooped CT in the final implementation. And then this is the pretty much about the concept extraction, and the operation was like 0.9%, and the test result was passed. And then coming to the second part of the first layer, which is semantic entropy calculation. So yeah, the semantic entropy was 0.776% along with AUC score of 0.876, which is also a pass. And then similar test cases were passed for this, and looking at the whole test cases, these are the results produced by the layer 1 in the aegis architecture. So it's like concept extraction accuracy was 0.9, but the threshold was 0.8, so the result is passed. And then semantic entropy calibration, HIDL trigger performance, which is 100%, and the target was 85%, which is also passed. And similarly, all other test cases were passed. So coming to the layer 2, so similarly in layer 2, the code implementation can be seen as